So speaking of the architects of our cyberpunk dystopia, let's talk about how every single one of the Conservative candidates is bloody useless. So, if you would like if you would like a articulation as to exactly why all of the Conservative candidates aren't particularly conservative, you can check out our book club on Edmund Burke's Reflections on the Revolution in France. He speaks about how every man's private stock of reason is limited and therefore allows him to fall back on his prejudices, the traditions of history that he's inherited from his forefathers. It's a doctrine of gratitude. I think a lot of the Conservatives would do well to actually read this and bother listening to the forefather of conservatism. But unfortunately, many of them haven't, so you should instead and tell them exactly what's wrong with them.
And I imagine they would probably tell you that they have read it.
I believe Kemi Badenoch actually cited him in one of her speeches.
Oh, really?
But other than
that's impressive.
It is impressive.
We've
However,
got literate members of the Conservative Party. I'm very impressed.
You say that, but I'm going to be a correction for the office simping on Kemi today.
Oh, yeah, of
course. Because I do have to set the record. I am very disappointed by the sort of fanboying by her because they think she's our girl. Unfortunately, she may also be ideologically captured. So, the Conservative leadership contest has whittled down its members to about 2 people this week. We're going to have another round of voting today. The results are going to be announced at 3 o'clock, and someone will be knocked out. On Monday, Tom Tugendhat was destroyed. On Tuesday, Kemi Badenoch was removed from the race, much to the disdain of a lot of Tory party core members who, according to Conservative home polls, wanted her to be their Prime Minister. There's very much a split between the Tory party apparatchiks and the grassroots on where to go. The Tory party apparatchiks are looking at electoral viability. Who's got the biggest name recognition? They believe it's Rishi Sunak, whereas a lot of the Conservative base, including some people around the office, believe that Kemi Badenoch was the best bet because she was the most anti-woke.
Well, as far as I'm concerned, what little I know about each of the candidates individually was that Kemi seemed, from what I've seen, and what I've seen may have just been sort of choice excerpts, was that she, like you say, was the least woke of everybody. As far as I could tell, she was the best of a bad bunch. But that just goes to show the terrible position the Conservatives have left us all in, sadly.
Well, that was the way that Peter Hitchens articulated it. When asked on his favourite candidate, he said, it's like picking your own form of execution, and Kemi Badenoch seemed to be the least painful. I don't wish to black pill everyone. Hopefully this can be a jumping off point for pressuring your politicians to remoralise themselves and refashion themselves in the form of Conservatives, but at the moment we don't have very many viable options, and as things get whittling down, they're looking worse and worse. It does feel like only yesterday when Boris Johnson won his massive 2019 electoral landslide victory. I actually remember sitting in a pub in Canterbury. We were the only Conservative table in the room. The pub had been hired out, unknown by us, by the Labour and Marxist societies, and they did a countdown to the exit poll.
There's some redundancy there, Labour and Marxist. You can just throw one of them out there.
Exactly why they were all sitting at the same tables, and with the student union as well. So everyone was in a very optimistic atmosphere. I remember one particular academic at this point, they're conflated, told me in November, we're on the cusp of a Labour victory in the UK and on the cusp of a Sanders victory in the United States. Obviously, those predictions didn't turn out all that well.
What was he smoking?
Well, he was the person who ran the Marxist Theory and Practice module for his...
So something very strong.
Yes, and then he became the head of school. Shocking at the persecution that I received while I was at university. But those societies decided to do a countdown to the exit poll, and when it got to 1, and the Conservative stonking majority came out on the screens, we were the only table that cheered. Within 20 minutes, we'd all football chanted them out of the pub. And then when the local Labour MP, Rosie Duffield, who was elected to Canterbury, came in expecting a round of applause from her supporters that had packed out the pub. Instead, she got us chanting old Jeremy Corbyn back at her until she left.
Oh.
Great evening. Really don't like that woman.
Still, sadly, in retrospect, sadly a little bit of a preemptive celebration on your part.
It was a bittersweet victory. We thought we were getting basically Bernie v Trump, and instead we got Biden v Bernie. We got Biden, and that's exactly how Boris Johnson's premiership has ended up. During Monday's confidence motion, Boris spoke mainly about how his COVID record was stellar, his record on Ukraine, how Labour were not willing to tackle online harms, so...
Come on, guys, I'm basically a socialist. I'm doing great.
Yeah, why aren't you unhappy with how the rate I've sabotaged the country? He also said that COVID had unknown origins, but mentioned a bat or a pangolin, rather than the Wuhan lab being the origin of the virus. So still pandering to Chinese interests, weirdly enough. He also just concluded his final PMQs, which is a massive self-aggrandising session where a bunch of MPs were kissing his backside, and then everyone on the Labour benches was saying, and Lib Dems saying, we need a general election now. I fear the results.
I mean, obviously, you might as well not have anybody there, because everything that's going on there, the Conservatives are kissing backside, as you would expect. opposition be opposition. Okay, so what's even the point of televising this right now?
It's entirely performative, and it's funny you said, why do we even have people there? Because we shouldn't be surprised that Boris Johnson's record wasn't all that. If we go to the next link, archived on his website is an article on global population control. I know, I can see your face. Not many people know about this. I'll read a quick paragraph from this, and strangely enough, it's worded in a way where you can agree with the premises and never the conclusions. But the conclusions are something that Boris Johnson is pushing, whereas the premises has been artificially inflated. So, he said, "It is time we had a grown-up conversation about the optimum quantity of human beings in the country and on this planet." The planet part is what concerns me. "Do we want the southeast of Britain, already the most densely populated major country in Europe, to resemble a giant suburbia?" Interesting that we've already spoken about how immigration is turning the country into megacity one. But Boris, unfortunately, you were responsible for a million people coming in last year of net migration, not to mention the small boats. So perhaps I would suggest, even if it's incompetence or perhaps deliberate malfeasance, you don't engineer a societal collapse by concentrating the population in one small sphere and then suggesting really insane and dangerous eugenicist population control measures as its only solution.
I also really despise the framing just immediately. It's time we had a grown-up discussion. And tell me, Boris, what exactly is the grown-up position? Oh, it's the one you already agree with, isn't it?
Yeah.
Funny how these things go.
It's almost strange how every single grown-up position in international institutions comes down to misanthropic population control. But speaking of people who are obsessed with population control, we see that the apple doesn't fall too far from the tree in that Stanley Johnson also produced articles for Conservative Home talking about why Britain needs a population control policy, and also produced a book on Amazon, if you can see next, which I don't think many people are going to be reading once we get rid of the cookies thing. There we go. World Populations, the United Nations, Challenge and Response. Reminder, he did work for the EU and the World Bank, so he was very interested in limiting populations.
Yeah, it does always amuse me that leftists seem to think of the Conservative Party as ontologically evil. And the thing is, for the most part, sadly, they're right, but for all of the wrong reasons.
In the wrong direction. Someone today actually got up, it was one of the Irish MPs, and she said, the Conservative Party has emboldened the far right. And I was thinking, oh, God, if only. Instead, they're talking about population control and having leftist climate narratives, which is miserable. We went to COP26, and actually Stanley Johnson was hosting.
Oh, did you see Little Amal at COP26?
I wasn't in that hall.
Oh.
We were at a fringe event where Stanley Johnson hosted a panel on climate solutions and waffled on, and he concluded the panel, not allowing anyone else to chime in. The final word was, and if we really care about climate solutions, we have to have a grown-up conversation about population control.
Oh my God, this I actually mentioned in the office the other day. I've been listening. People know that I'm into heavy metal, and I was listening to Cradle of Filth's most recent album from last year. Cradle of Filth being a British-based black metal band. Normally those guys sing about Satan, disgusting ritual orgies, and all that sort of stuff that makes you throw up the horns and go, yes, this is disgusting and cool, whatever. But there was one song called Suffer Our Dominion that opened with a little excerpt of a speech where somebody was saying, oh, the climate's going to destroy us all, and if we don't have voluntary population control, it's like, this is the least metal thing I've ever heard. At least change it so it says involuntary population control. At least that sounds a little bit more heavy metal and rebellious, but this is just, all of the heavy metal establishment just throwing their hands up and going, we support the establishment, yes, we are rebels. What do you mean?
Well, Boris is about to get a lot more free time, considering he's out of a job, so I suppose he's setting himself up for a new one.
Maybe you should join Cradle of Filth.
Yeah, well, it would sound better than Carrie shrieking at home. But as we can see from the Conservative Home's reporting on this, the leadership race has now narrowed. Rishi Sunak has 118 votes. He's up 3. He's just 1 away from the magical 119 number that cements his place in the final 2. Penny Mordaunt is up 10 votes. She actually lost 1 vote because Tobias Ellwood, he had the whip withdrawn from him because he didn't show up to Monday's confidence motion because he just decided to complain about Boris Johnson not wanting to rejoin the EU. Liz Truss has gone up 15 votes, so Penny Mordaunt's still ahead of her, but it's actually suspected that Kemi Badenoch, who was knocked out yesterday, a lot of her voters will go over to Liz Truss because the two work together. Kemi seems, by at least her verbiage in the debates, to stand against Penny Mordaunt's pro-trans opinions. So it would be surprising if Penny Mordaunt made it through to the next round, but we're still going to cover her misgivings today anyway.
And I think as we're speaking right now, will they be casting votes for the next round?
Yes.
And we'll find out tomorrow.
It's announced at 3 o'clock.
It's announced at 3 o'clock,
Yes.
and then the campaigns over summer will be going on from that point onwards for the last 2.
Yeah, so you can switch over to a number of various sources by the conclusion of this podcast and see it live announced on things like YouTube. So, Just skipping past the Guido Fawkes link next, because it's basically just an infographic of where the standings are. Looking at who was knocked out on Monday, let's look at Tom Tugendhat. We're not going to be crying over spilt milk, because he attended the Bilderberg meeting last month with Ida Alkan, funnily enough, the author of You Will Own Nothing and You Will Be Happy.
Oh, fantastic.
He also attended with David Lammy and Michael Gove. So there's a sort of uni-party measure here to back warmongers who want to divvy the profits up among themselves.
I think the best analogy I've heard for all of this is they're all cheeks of the same arse.
Yes. Yeah, that's exactly about right. Speaking of that, I saw that someone say that tweet earlier, because there was a picture of them all having World Economic Forum profiles for the final three. But funnily enough, Tom Tugendhat's Economic Forum profile seems to have been scrubbed somewhat.
Very interesting. I don't know if you're going to bring this up, Kemi Badenoch, I think, is related, or her husband is also related to the World Economic Forum as well.
That will be later, because no one else has mentioned this, and some people have been excusing it away. Also, this has happened for a lot of other MPs, because, again, nobody's mentioning this. Steve Baker had a World Economic Forum profile. Nobody seems to bring that up. Nobody's questioned him on it. It's gone. It's been archived here. I archived this. But nobody's quizzed him on it yet. So, again, thinking there are guys, that he's some libertarian hero. So,
there's no good establishment English libertarians,
nope.
as far as I'm concerned.
Even Desmond Swain's throwing his weight behind Rishi Sunak yesterday. I know. How
disappointing.
How disappointing. So, speaking of people that are going to be disappointments, did we dodge a bullet with Kemi Badenoch? Now, Kemi, in this interview with what was his name? Tom Newton-Dunn on Talk TV, said she would have actually scrapped net zero commitments if it would have bankrupted the nation. So,
which it will.
It will, yeah. And she said none of us politicians will be here to be held accountable for it, so the target's kind of arbitrary, which I really liked the sound of. And then I did some digging into her background, because, of course, you have to with politicians. Her husband, Hamish Badenoch, as The Sun reports, with this dreadful photo with Theresa May, is the global head future of work and real estate transformation at Deutsche Bank. You know the bank that deplatformed President Trump? Yeah, he was on the executive board of that.
Also,
has been for a long time.
With all of the problems that we're facing in England right now as well, connections to somebody in a deep connections to somebody in a bank who's head of a real estate transformation.
The exact kind of architect of You Will Own Nothing and You Will Be Happy.
Yes.
He's basically emptying out office spaces to make things more work from home. I believe he set the target at 30%. So that means there's going to be a hell of a lot more places opened up to become high-rise one-bedroom renting apartments. If you don't do anything about the immigration, then you've got all those occupants. The status quo of housing, where we can't actually afford a home but have to rent endlessly, stays the same. Deutsche Bank also deplatformed President Trump, as I mentioned, after the January 6th insurrection, the worst thing to happen to American democracy since Nancy Pelosi became a congresswoman. Deutsche Bank also displays its ESG action on its website. If you'd like to know more about ESGs, there will be a link in the description to my article on it for lotuseasons.com. But basically, it's a set of woke criteria that acts as a insurance mechanism against the principle of get woke, go broke, that keeps businesses accountable to consumers that don't like their public actions. And it's partnered with the World Economic Forum because it's their vision of stakeholder capitalism. A bunch of hedge funds and banks prop up businesses to take climate conscious or socially conscious activities that aren't necessarily profitable now, but will create the new utopia where you will own nothing and you will be happy.
Well, I mean, one of the primary culprits behind ESG scores is, of course, the gigantic hedge fund company BlackRock, whose head, Larry Fink, is on the board of the World Economic Forum. There's also Vanguard. I've looked less into them, but I wouldn't be surprised if their head is also deep in with the World Economic Forum.
Well,
also,
they're deep in with wokery because they were sponsoring family drag events recently. The Post-Millennial were reporting on this. Yes, I know. Hedge fund capital destroying the concept of sexuality.
Family drag events.
Wonderful. Hamish also has participated in panels calling for equitable employee experiences with this company here. There was a link to a tweet that brought me to this website, and again, they're just putting loads of stuff on ESGs on this website, so not to be trusted. Hamish also worked at Barclays, according to his own LinkedIn profile, and I've documented how they've been ideologically captured too by the World Economic Forum in my article. If you'll see in the next tab here, it was on page 12 of this document, Blueprint for a Digital Identity. As you can see, Barclays were on board with creating digital IDs, corporate identities, incorporated with digital currencies for tracking every single person's, consumers, businesses, etc., in concordance with ESG scores. Deutsche Bank's also there.
Now, Connor,
Yes.
remind me, which of the potential leaders of the country going forwards was it who was talking rather enthusiastically last year about the potential of introducing central bank digital currencies, which definitely aren't the first step in a massively slippery slope to social credit scores?
It would be Rishi Sunak, and we're going to cover that very shortly. because he is a nightmare on two legs. So speaking of WEF sycophants, let's divert to Penny Mordaunt, shall we? And get rid of that newspaper subscription thing. Penny Mordaunt supports BLM. That's wonderful.
Oh, very
She
conservative.
originally supported Jeremy Hunt, the Chinese lockdown fanatic, in his 2019 leadership race against Boris Johnson. And then during the Euros of 2020, she backed people kneeling on the pitch for BLM. She even went as far as to say BLM, in her book, have drawn vital attention to issues of systemic racism and inequality.
But she is excellent at belly flopping.
Yes. Well, when you got belly like that, I suppose. Mordaunt also says trans women are women. As the infamous clip says, in a 2021 Westminster debate, she declared that trans men are men, trans women are women. The comment came during discussion of the ministerial and other maternity allowances bill after the House of Lords forced an amendment to replace pregnant people in the bill with expectant mothers. And Mordaunt is often the one who's the pregnant people substitution is laid at her feet. Actually, Suella Braverman, in an interview with Dan Wootton last night on GB News, said that she was personally offended by Penny Mordaunt trying to keep this in because she was pregnant at the time. So
I think that would be a little bit upsetting, wouldn't it? The fact that it's kind of depersonalising and dehumanising you as a pregnant person rather than woman.
She might have just called them vessels.
Yeah,
Mordaunt's
good
tweet
point.
then came out about how she understands womanhood, and she continued to not define what a woman is. Again, the bar for our politics is staggeringly low.
Once again, from the perspective, the foundations that these people are working off, somebody like Penny Mordaunt, she has completely accepted the leftist interpretation of womanhood and manhood as basically being a purely social aesthetic.
It's an assumed politically prescribed identity, and this is the semantic trap that Simone de Beauvoir created when she said one is not born but becomes a woman. And that is in part true in that you grow into womanhood and that you have a set of virtues associated with womanhood, but by socially constructing an identity for womanhood, she involuntarily politicizes the entire category and lays claim as a feminist to women as a class. And this is the problem if you buy into the gender identity perspective of, if you see womanhood as a costume, then a certain number of new prescriptions come with that costume that are at odds with historical standards.
Well, they absolutely do see womanhood as a costume, as Matt Walsh pointed out. They just don't want to say that out loud. Yep. It might also have something to do with sexual fetishes, but you didn't hear that from me.
It's just gender blackface, I'm going to say it. So, Penny Mordaunt says, I am biologically a woman. If I have a hysterectomy or mastectomy, I am still a woman. And I am legally a woman. Some people are born male and who have been through the gender recognition process are also legally female. I'm sure we're going to get onto the redefinition of female in your segment. That does not mean they are biologically women like me. Okay, then Penny, how can you be a biological category legally without being that biological category? Can you square that circle for me? Please, for the love of God, understand the definitions of words. You're not Humpty Dumpty. You can't make whatever word mean that you think it means. Okay. Then it turns to her book. Her book that's often lauded. I'm sure it was a bestseller.
She can read? Let alone write?
Well, someone can certainly ghostwrite for her. Penny Mordaunt's book was endorsed by Tony Blair and Bill Gates.
What's her book on?
Greater Britain After the Storm. So COVID-19 recovery. It's her own Klaus Schwab's Great Reset.
Of course. So how to solve the problems that we caused.
Yeah, exactly.
There you go.
Yeah.
Fantastic.
Yeah, it's like burglars breaking into your home and then selling you home insurance. Mordaunt sought policy advice from former Labour PM and Blair's Chancellor Gordon Brown as well for her leadership campaign. You know, the man that sold all our gold reserves off and worsened the recession and actually caused a lot of discord between the Blair government and Number 11.
I was going to say,
well.
you mentioned it's not just advice, didn't you say it was economic advice from Gordon Brown as well?
And campaigning advice as well. You know, Gordon Brown, not at all famous for his gaffes on the campaign trail. For
Gordon
telling
Brown,
she was a bigot.
the charisma vacuum himself.
Oh, I don't know. He's got at least one eye on the ball. No wonder Carl called the Conservatives Blair Light in Monday's podcast. Then Toby Young has done a review of her book, the man at the head of the Free Speech Union, doing God's work on defending our civil liberties. The book praises Black Lives Matter for having drawn attention to inequality and injustice. It complains about sitcoms like It Ain't Half Mum. I'll try that again. It Ain't Half Hot Mum, thanks to the tongue twister, for casual racism, homophobia, white privilege, colonialism, and transphobia. It agrees with the critical race theory position that logic and reason are white hegemonic constructs. She says, the problem is that most of our leaders are drawn from a narrow background. Their education and training was from the last century, when the world was very different. It was long-term, male, patient, predictable, factual, planned, heterosexual, white, Christian, Western. Sorry, all of the non-white Christians around the world will take issue with that, and all of these sane people who believe in facts, who are not necessarily white, will disagree with that. You
Larry
utter racist.
Elder would like to speak to you about this.
And I actually hold a candle to
Alvin
Larry
Robinson as well would probably have something to say about it. And just go back straight up to the top. The first thing in this tweet thread, glowing forward by Bill Gates. That's all I need to know.
Yeah.
That's all I need to know. This is not a person to be trusted.
Oh, do you have a problem with their association with Bill Gates by any chance, Harry? Because it continues.
Oh,
Penny
great.
Mordaunt co-delivered a speech with Gates at Edinburgh University in the next link. It's archived on the government website. You can take a look at the transcript. There's also a video of it, which we're not going to play in the next bit. But the purpose of this was to launch the Global Academy of Agriculture and Food Security. Yeah.
Food security?
Yes. So the idea that Bill Gates buying up a lot of farmland means that, what? That we're suddenly going to have a squeeze on food security because he's growing corn for ethanol, and that suddenly he has a monopoly on exactly what kind of food we eat, like synthetic beef only.
Personally, when I want to consider of excellent farmers, I immediately go to billionaire tech moguls to be able to grow my food.
Well, especially with those breasts. And I mean Bill Gates, not Penny Mordaunt. She was then endorsed by George Freeman, MP, in CapX. It's a Centre for Policy Studies outlet, which I've written for before. So they're actually not a bad outlet. The problem is George Freeman, if you investigate his background, if you look at his Twitter profile, he said that she's a Prime Minister for Uni, Prosperity and Security. The problem is we're not very secure with the infiltration of our MPs by the World Economic Forum. He's saying that we've got to make markets work for the many, which is a literal Corbynist slogan. And then in the next tweet, he just tweets out a graphic of Arch Bond villain himself with probably the most totalitarian quote I've ever heard. "The fourth industrial revolution will affect the very essence of our human experience." So he's pushing transhumanism. Great.
Potentially, other than that, just complete social engineering on display right there. Change the very essence of our human experience means we need to manipulate you to be able to, so that you actually are fine with everything that we're trying to do.
So, excuse me if I'm not too enthusiastic about this cabinet. So then Mordaunt then partnered with the WEF on climate change. She said, "I will co-host the Ellen MacArthur Foundation and the World Economic Forum's Global Plastics Action Partnership, a meeting with major brands, waste management companies and investors." Basically, a private-public partnership, almost like corporatism, almost like fascism. We are going to be discussing how we can put the global plastic supply chain on a more sustainable footing. Now, we can agree with the causes here. We can agree that plastics in our oceans, even in our lungs, microplastics in our food aren't a good thing. We can also say that we don't want an unaccountable, unelected, totalitarian organisation like the WEF having command over this.
I mean, even despite that, I mean, obviously I agree with you completely. Why would I consider the government to be the people best equipped to be able to handle this? Why? What skills do you have to get? Do you have to be in government? Is it responsible fiscal responsibility? Rishi Sunak says no. Is it actually knowing what you're talking about when it comes to green issues? No. Boris Johnson and net zero shows that. Is it having any kind of problem-solving skills whatsoever? No. It's how well you lie and how charismatic you are while you're doing it.
Well, unfortunately for Penny Mordaunt, she's not that charismatic, but she is definitely a chameleonic liar. She then cited the WEF in a speech on achieving global pay equity. And it says gender equality here, but she's saying closing the fictional gender pay gap. So, complete nonsense.
What? At this point, I mean, we bang home about this so often, but what is conservative about the Conservatives at this point? Because as far as I'm concerned, this isn't even like conservatism as progressivism going the speed limit. This is just pure progressivism to the extent that the Labour Party are pushing it. Maybe there's a few dissenters within the ranks. But the fact of the matter is that, sadly, as far as it's concerned, the Conservatives have derailed and ostracised any amount of discussion anywhere to the right of them. Like I say, the fact of the matter is, if you're a party like UKIP that was actually trying to promote right-wing ideas and say, hey, let's get a control of our borders or other such things, you're just immediately dismissed as a fascist. And the Conservative Party has a big role to play in that by platforming these sorts of people on supposedly conservative platforms. It's terrible.
Well, you're not allowed a sort of parochial concern, a Little Englander mentality, because they've already decided on the utopian global conclusion. And all this is your frustration with the fact that this isn't conservative, because they're not trying to be. This is just global identity socialism with a blue rosette.
Well, it's the fact as well that you can basically just get attributed to being a Nazi. If you say, for instance, don't want to support the war in Ukraine, that just means, like you say, you're an evil Little Englander.
You don't want to support Nazis in
isolationist.
Ukraine, Nazi.
But yeah, there's this weird application of the idea that unless you put everybody else's goals above your own, that makes you basically the same as Neville Chamberlain. You're just another person who back in World War II wouldn't have wanted to go and save the Jews, as if that's the real reason we even entered World War II in the first place.
And considering Klaus Schwab's father's connections, which we will not comment on here, but are in my article on ESGs, I wouldn't be comparing his opponents to the Nazis. So, this is all very interesting because Boris, actually, not many people know, banned ministers from attending the WEF conference. But they still maintained involvement. So, again, the idea that it's just conservatism in name only, but they're pushing forward with the globalist agenda is irrefutably true.
So is that image of the local Davos police force that Callum and I have covered before?
That's the image of the Spectre agents hiding out on top of Blofeld's snowy mountain layer. Speaking of globalist captured people, Rishi Sunak, the only candidate who's been openly endorsed by a Chinese party outlet. Now, Rishi Sunak has actually made an interesting promise. He's promised to crack down on grooming gang crime, saying they will never again be repeated. Now, Sajid Javid promised the same thing, of course, and nothing came of it. So whether or not anything actually happens if he does become Prime Minister will remain to be seen. But I sincerely hope he doesn't become Prime Minister because his economic record is atrocious, and I'll just go through a few quick points here. He bankrupted the country with the fraud-fraught COVID furlough scheme, and also Eat Out to Help Out, which slashed restaurant bills by half, but it's because they were to do with taxes, so in fact you were paying for your own bill twice over. He reversed his position on Labour's windfall tax and oil and gas profits to increase his proposed £200 energy loan, which he would have had to pay back over 4 years, to a £400 non-repayable rebate. The problem is that deters investment in future energy security in Britain, and also down the road they're just going to increase their prices anyway because nobody's going to lose out on a bonus. He refused to cut tax further on fuel when almost half the prices paid at pumps are tax. When he brought in his 5p fuel duty cut, he was already taking in 7p more a litre in VAT increases because of his money printing, so technically he's still taking 2p more a litre anyway, and that drives inflation. And he implemented a global 15% minimum corporation tax with a bunch of other countries, and he's looking to increase that well beyond, I believe it's about 24%, which was higher than even Corbyn proposed at 18%.
Yes, and as I covered yesterday, he is absolutely refusing to even consider a tax cut for us lowly plebs, because that would apparently drive inflation, the same inflation that he caused in the first place, or at least certainly helped to cause, and presumably might be taking advice from the head of the International Monetary Fund, seeing as people seem to be wanting to report on that, like the BBC, who actually advised that the best thing to do in a situation like this would be to increase taxes, because these people have completely bought into the modern monetary theory idea that taxes is basically just the government trying to keep money out of the economy so that it won't cause inflation, which is just absolute nonsense.
Well, I once spoke to an Oxford academic at a supposedly conservative summit, and I questioned him as to why they weren't doing tax cuts to fund certain programs, so targeted tax incentives for infrastructure upgrades on this levelling up promise. And he actually said tax cuts are a form of redistribution, because he somehow believes that the government is a progenitor of all wealth.
Oh God, yes. The money comes from government, and once again, it's just the idea that taxes destroy money. I don't understand how anybody could ever come to that. And once again, the idea that letting people keep more of their own money that they earned in the first place, that the government by all rights has no claim to in the first place, is redistribution, is just a disgusting example of how these people see you and I as just completely beneath them.
Yeah, it's the asinine bass-ackwards approach to economics that
Yeah,
sets the state as the progenitor of all things productive.
We are hamsters in a maze to these people, and they're just trying to lead us by the nose to the piece of cheese that they've got to keep us going, and it's absolutely horrifying. I hate this.
Speaking of bad bankers, Rishi Sunak was famous for formerly working at Goldman Sachs, who are another WEF partner.
The most trustworthy bank in the world.
Yes, who have also doubtless partnered with them on digital IDs and financial technologies. Speaking of financial technologies, Sunak is... his family business, actually, and this is reported by the National Pulse, is a group called Infosys. So this is a firm owned by the father of his non-dom citizen, non-tax-paying wife at a time where he's put up taxes massively. I'm trying to pronounce his Indian name, Akshata Murthy. He's the founder of Infosys, which is an Indian tech company which is suspected as being part of the information gathering infrastructure for the social credit system of the World Economic Forum's Great Reset. Infosys is actually a WEF partner. As you can see, they have a web page on the WEF's website in the next link. Shockingly, Sunak is now the man that is using this information gathering and his time in the financial sector to spearhead digital currencies for the G7. Majid Nawaz already exposed this as a flashpoint moment on Joe Rogan's podcast. I've written about this a bunch of times, including for the WEF ESG's piece on the Lotus Eaters website. And basically, digital currencies are a centralized digital form of transaction the government can see using blockchain technology every single transaction that's taken place, so nothing will be against taxation. Outside taxation, there'll be no cash in hand, and suddenly if you say the wrong thing on your social media, which will be backed up by your online harms bill digital passport, then boom, there goes your ability to earn or save overnight.
I mean, at the end of the day, if the government controls the economy, they control you. If the government controls the money supply, they control you.
And there's a very mask-off moment in the next article, actually, because Tom Mutton, the head of the Bank of England, suggested governments could introduce programmability with built-in smart contracts, ensuring that restrictions could be placed on where and how currencies are spent and on what, to ensure socially beneficial outcomes. ESGs in action on the consumer level. So it's funny, actually, that the best insight we have against this kind of economic control, as you said, if the government controls the money, they control you, is from Vladimir Lenin. Let's read him directly. The big banks are the state apparatus which we need to bring about socialism, and which we can take ready-made from capitalism. A single state bank, the biggest of the big, with branches in every rural district, in every factory, will constitute as much of 9/10 of the socialist apparatus. This will be countrywide bookkeeping, countrywide accounting of the production and distribution of goods. This will be, so to speak, something in the nature of the skeleton of a socialist society. So Rishi Sunak is reading from the Leninist revolutionary playbook here, and essentially amounting a digital communist takeover of our currencies.
Well, I mean, his buddy Klaus does have a bust of Lenin in his room.
I think that's disputed, but I wouldn't put it past him. I think someone said it was someone else, but I wouldn't be shocked if it was
It looked
Lenin.
an awful lot like Lenin,
and
man.
considering
Was this fact-checked? Was this debunked by fact-checkers?
Considering Klaus's links to Paulo Freire, which a Marxist educator, which James Lindsay has done God's work exposing, and I might be discussing on tomorrow's podcast, I wouldn't be shocked if it actually was. So why is Rishi Sunak a frontrunner if this is just all this kind of terrible nonsense? Well, because his other closest rivals, as we've already covered, and his second closest rival are just as equally corrupt or incompetent. Let's look at Liz Truss, shall we? In ITV's leadership debate, I did timestamp this for... Oh, no, I think this is the... Is this the clip for the... taxes one? Okay, so Liz Truss decided to call out Rishi Sunak's record on the economy, and he then turned around and called her, of all things, a socialist. Let's play the clip.
Rishi Sunak, I'd really like to give you the opportunity to just draw a breath there, because you are the person to pose the next question. Fire away.
Right. My question's for Liz, actually. And Liz, in your past, you've been both a Liberal Democrat and a Remainer. I was just wondering which one you regretted most.
I am somebody who was not born into the Conservative Party. I went to school in Paisley and Leeds. I went to a comprehensive school. My parents were left-wing activists, and I've been on a political journey ever since. But my fundamental belief, and the reason I am a Conservative, is I saw kids at my school being let down in Leeds. I saw them not get the opportunities, not get the proper educational standards that you might have got at your school, Rishi. I saw them having wasted potential, and I thought that waste was wrong. That's why I'm Conservative, because I believe that everybody needs to have that opportunity. I believe in high education standards. That's why I'm proud I introduced the new Maths GCSE, which my daughter is now sitting, that gives people a better grounding. That's why I'm proud of signing all those trade deals, so we can give opportunities to companies right around this country. That's why I became a Conservative.
That's all right.
Sorry, did she just basically say that she's a Conservative because she believes in equality, which is a left-wing kind of principle?
Yes. Well, she's talking like a materialist rather than having any kind of conservative metaphysic, putting forward a belief in the family or the gratitude for having inherited a cultural
No
tradition.
mention of hierarchy there. We need everyone to be the same, everyone to be able to have the same opportunities, which is a foundational logic that will only lead you to socialism.
Yeah, and it's profoundly anti-Burkean as well. I did actually get those clips, unfortunately, slightly mixed up, because that was her response to Rishi Sunak asking, what are you more ashamed of, being a Lib Dem at the time where you wanted to abolish the monarchy, or a Remainer? And I thought Liz Truss's response, even though the content of it wasn't great, is probably her least wooden delivery, because if anyone's watched any of the other debates, she has been stiff as a board and looking like a deer in the headlights, clearly can't go off script. But the other clip is actually the second one, which I'm very sorry for annoying you there, John, is him calling her a socialist.
Rishi, you have raised taxes to the highest level in 70 years. That is not going to drive economic growth. You raised national insurance, even though people like me opposed it in Cabinet at the time, because we could have afforded to fund the NHS through general taxation. The fact is that raising taxes at this moment will choke off economic growth and it will prevent us getting the revenue we need to pay off the debt.
Rishi Sunak, respond to Liz Truss.
I mean, we have to also recognise that we just went through a once-in-a-century pandemic with all the damage that it did to our economy. And I think everyone realises that we were going to have to pay that back. But I'd love to stand here. I'd love to stand here and say, look, I'll cut this tax, and another tax, and it will all be OK. But you know what? It won't. There's a cost to these things, the cost of higher inflation, higher mortgage rates, eroded savings. And you know what? This something-for-nothing economics isn't conservative, it's socialism.
Under your plans, we are predicted to have a recession because you have raised tax, it is cutting back on growth, it is preventing companies from investing, and it's taking money out of people's pockets. That is no way to get the economy going during a recession.
And we're in a recession, and they just need to bloody admit it rather than dance around the subject.
Well, he's not even dancing around the subject. Rishi Sunak is speaking as if the economy itself caught COVID, and he's not taking any accountability for how his policies demonstrably damaged our economy. And if we look at the Telegraph's reporting on this, Rishi Sunak is the man who presided over the Bank of England's quantitative easing strategy, which printed £150 billion in November 2020 alone to pay for the second round of his furlough scheme. So if that was the trend, what the hell else went on? What other figures are there out there? Is that just for purely furlough? That's not including businesses that you would have bailed out who would have failed otherwise? Assuming so, because of course we had the COVID bounce back scheme and we also had the Out to Help Out scheme, so we spent an insane amount, and then we also wasted lots on fraud, hence why one of the Treasury ministers, or was it a minister or was it one of the members of the House of Lords, that resigned saying, I've presided over too much incompetence, I can't look at this anymore. I mean, if he's so desperate to not cut taxes, because otherwise how are we supposed to pay back all of those debts? I mean, we could just slash a hell of a lot of the government spending that's already going off to basically non-productive, wasteful means, such as all of the equality and diversity departments across NHS trusts across the country. Which, non-specifically, Liz Truss is actually implying a promise of, because she has said she's open to leaving the ECHR. She has said that she's looking to bring the income tax threshold lowering forward. She said that she's looking to scrap the national insurance rise and scrap the green levies, which everyone's been going on about. The only problem with Liz Truss is... I was going to say, are you trying to win me over to Truss? She might be having some good advisors in her camp. However, Liz Truss as a person herself, after telling people to go off and fight in the Ukraine war and getting a bunch of people incarcerated and possibly executed, and saying something like this here, which we won't play, but she said genuinely, with a straight face, that the Americans like Love Island, therefore we'll do a trade deal with them. Liz Truss is a babbling idiot. I think trade deals have a bit more to do with that. That's genuinely like saying we'll enter a war together because of Harry Potter. Now, you might wonder why Liz Truss has got this high, and Thomas Dowling did cover on the website why we can't trust the Truss, so go and look at that. But Truss is specifically a beneficiary of David Cameron's all-woman shortlists, which Cole covered on Monday, but David Cameron did to diversify the cabinet, basically to sabotage the competence of Conservative candidates, which is the reason we've got these clowns now. Now, why did Liz Truss's career flounder so heavily? Was it just purely her incompetence? Well, no. If we're looking at Boris Johnson's record of malfeasance, Liz Truss has had her own scandals. Liz Truss had an affair with Foreign Office Minister Mark Field, who is notorious for snogging Jeremy Hunt's wife. God knows why you'd want to. She runs a TV program for Chinese state-owned media, but also he's famous for being the guy who forcibly removed a Greenpeace activist by the neck from a Tory party dinner. I believe there's if you scroll down a little bit, there might be an image of this. That's him snogging Jeremy Hunt's wife.
Was Jeremy Hunt in that crowd when that was going on?
I believe he might have been. He wrestled this woman out of a Tory party function because she showed up to protest it, and he just grabs her by the neck and hauls her out, thought patrolling.
I'm beginning to like this man.
Yeah, so he's quite based. However, Liz Truss clearly does not have that many conservative principles. Even though she salvaged her marriage from this affair, she's hardly a change of pace from misconduct. So she might well be a vote for your own preferential interest if you'd like more money in your pocketbook, particularly against Rishi Sunak when she might be becoming the other candidate in the final two. But let's not hold out high hopes of her being any kind of articulate person on the global stage. Suffice to say, her career has not been short of misconduct either. So, am I excited about any of the Conservative candidates? As you might tell, not really. As Labour MP Clive Lewis actually quipped, something smart from the Labour benches for once, it's like soiling your pants and deciding you're going to change your shirt. All are compromised by their long ascension up the Tory party apparatus. When you've compromised your way to get into power, compromise becomes the doctrine of your power, or their affiliation with unelected international institutions like the WEF or the UN. None have proposed an immigration moratorium, for example. Many speak the same race-conscious language of progressives. You see some people even going after Kemi Badenoch, despite her husband's terrible record, by saying, oh, she's a black woman that can challenge progressive narratives on race. I don't care about her colour, I care about the content of character and policies. I don't think her policies were all that great. I don't think her husband's character was all that great, and I don't trust any of them. I'm glad Boris is gone. I'm one of the people that was calling for him to go, particularly because he put me and you under house arrest for 2 years. Utterly unforgivable. I don't care if he had libertarian instincts. He betrayed every single one of those. But things have unfortunately and can always get worse. If the communists in the Labour Party decide to swap their cardboard cutout Blairite leader at the moment for someone with any modicum of charisma, they'll storm the next election. And this is a Conservative suicide in their making, and I'm only angry because we are forced to pay for their mistakes.
If you appreciated that segment from the podcast of the Lotus Eaters, you can go to lotuseaters.com to get access to all the premium content we have on the site, such as this live hangout here, being the Wisdom in the Book of Songs with Luke Avery and Carl there. And if you want to follow what else we're putting out, you can follow us on Getter at lotuseaters_com on Getter. Thank you and goodbye.